We're going to look at multi-dimensional arrays today. So obviously an array is a sequence of the same thing, and we access that given an index. A multi-dimensional array is just an array of arrays, or potentially even an array of arrays. So you can think about it as one array containing, with the items in that array are other arrays. Okay, now obviously they've got to be of the same type. And we'll keep it relatively simple today, and we'll work with a string array. So our standard string array looks like this. Okay, and we might have a list, I don't know, of names. So we might say string names equals, and then we could create a string literal, and we might say, you know, Andrew, Helen, maybe Janet, Mike. Okay, that's our single dimensional array. We should be familiar with that. Okay, but if we wanted to, well, an array of arrays is just where each of these items would be replaced with their own, each of those would be an array, each in and of itself. Okay, so let's say we wanted to use an array, and this isn't really the way we would typically store data in this format, and we'll look at better approaches to doing this in later sessions, but this is just more for getting familiar with arrays. Let's say we wanted to store a list of not just names, but also the modules that or a module that person teaches. Okay, so we do that, and essentially for a two-dimensional array we just put a second set of brackets in. So we might say modules, and then we'd assign that some values. Now, to keep it simple and readable, I'm going to put each of the arrays on their own line. So that's going to be, if we think about a single dimensional array, it's going to be a bit like the equivalent of doing this. Okay, and that will help it to be readable, and then each of these will be an array. Okay, so we've got our outer bracket. And then essentially, so we'll have the first thing, first array in our module, second array. Obviously, I'm not putting anything in these arrays, and the third one there. Okay, I just need to semicolon at the end. Okay, now this is an array of empty arrays. It's got 3 empty arrays in it, so chances are we would want something in these. Okay, so let's say we put in, first of all, the module code. So you're doing 4201, aren't you? And that's taught by, that's called, in fact, let's put its title in. So this could be professional skills, and it's taught by Graham. Now you see, really these are different things. This is the module code, this is the module title, and this is the module tutor. So as I say, it will work for the purposes of the demo, but in reality, and later on, we're likely to want to actually use an object that might represent a module where we can know what we know things by name. So we'd assign a variable that would be called, for example, module code, another one that's module title, another one that's potentially tutor. But this will work for this demo. You're also taught 4210, many of you. So that one is user experience, and that's taught by Andy. Okay, and then those of you studying this module, you're doing programming 1, and I'm teaching that to you. So this is our two-dimensional array. So each item is an array, and those arrays of strings. So how do we go about accessing these items? I'm going to get rid of this one for now, just to avoid any confusion. So if you think of these sort of outer arrays, these have the same, this would be the if we used an index. So if we wanted to get a single module, so we might say, for example, string array well, what should we call it, programming, that is going to be modules, and then we use the index for that. So that's 0, that's 1, that's 2. So this will get us the programming module. And then we could go to that module and get the tutor. So we could say, for example, string tutor equals programming, and then again 0, 1, 2. Or let's rather than do 2, 2, we'll take one in the middle. Let's go for title, and we'll say that's going to be. So that will get us this. Okay. And just to verify that, we could print out the title, and what we should see is programming 1 printed out. So let's try that. There we go. But we don't actually have to break it down in that format. What we can do instead is to go directly to the modules and add a second qualifier. So if we know that this gives us an internal array, adding the second index and making this not an array will give us the programming title. Okay, so if we were to print out the programming, I can't spell, can I? title, and we print that out, we'll get the same result. Okay, so if, for example, we wanted to get the module code of the first module, we could change that to a 0, that to a 0, you know, let's just say, we'll just call this item for now, because otherwise the variable name is going to be misleading as we change things. So this will get us 4201 because it's the first item in the first array. If we want the tutor for the second array, we'll use the second index. That gets us this array, and then the index position 2, and that should get us Andy printed out. Okay. Now the other thing we're likely to do is to use loops to iterate through things. Okay, so we need to think about what's happening when we do that. So if we were to create a, we could do a for each loop. So if we do a for each loop, we could say for string module, oops, in modules, then each item here, each module is going to be an array still. Okay, so we might say, if we wanted to, you know, format the printing nicely, we could say, we could print out module, and we could get the code, and then we could concatenate that with a colon, and then we could do module and get the title, and then we might say, okay, well, we'll put space and then a bracket, and then we'd say module and then 3, and then add that closing bracket. So if we run that, we'll get a nice sort of printed format of the, oops, no we don't. So what I've done here, you can see I've made an error because I've gone 0, 1, 3. Obviously that's outside the bounds of any one of these arrays. What I want is 2. So we'll run that again. And then we see we've got our nicely formatted output. The other thing we might do, for example, is to do a nested loop. Okay, so we might then say, well, let's say we wanted to go through and just print out the titles. We might say for item, well, let's do it as a for I loop. Actually, no, in fact, if we just want the title, we don't even need to do another loop, because we could just say print out the module and then 1. Okay, if we wanted to go through everything, we'd probably put a loop within a loop. So if we want to just print everything out on a line, we could say for string, oops, item in module, and then we could print that out, and that will give us 4201, then professional skills, then Graham. So let's do that. So we could just say item, and the sort of thing we might want to do here is split it up. So we might print an empty line out in between, for example. So we could say after we've done the loop through the interior, one individual array, what we then might do is print out a new line. Okay, so if we run that, you can see whilst it's printed them all out, this allows us to carry out some action that takes place between items in the array. Okay. We don't have to use a fast enumeration for each loop. We could do it all manually. So we could create a for I loop. We could say while modules, well, it's less than the module's length, okay, and that gives us our I, which would represent in turn each one of these items. We then might create another for loop in there. Okay, again, the index often used is j because we're moving on from I. Here we would then need to make it the length of that individual module. So what we do is do modules I dot length. So we're iterating through the length of this. Now, theoretically, I think we could have different length arrays. Although it'd be an odd data structure, it would be possible to do that. So we don't want to just hard code in the value 3 there, in case at some point in the future we came in and added, made one of these longer or what have you. Okay, and then we could, print out, and we would just get that item again. We could say modules I j. Okay, and if we wanted that same effect where we printed out space between them, we could print out an empty line. It's probably warning us that we could use a for each loop instead. Yeah, we could replace it with an enhanced for loop. So we can hit run, and we get the same output. Okay. Things we can't really do, we can't mix the data types. Okay, so we can't, for example, decide that we just want the numeric value there because this is still an array of strings. Okay, so we can't mess about like that. As I say, they can have different lengths. It's not an optional module, but we can do that. Okay, so if we then ran this, we'd see that for user experience, we get that extra value printed out. Okay. I think that's everything I want to say on multidimensional arrays. As I say, this is not necessarily the approach that we would want to take in the long run once we've studied a bit more about classes and objects, which we'll do later in the course. But we do see other types of data formatted in this way, and it's always useful to understand how it works. It can be a bit challenging to get your head around, particularly when you've got two sets of indices, understanding which is which. Being able to kind of visualize how the data is structured, it is quite helpful in that regard.